Prejudices against sexual and ethnic minorities are salient issues, both in the public debate and the academia. You have taken an interest with prejudices against rich people. How come?
Yes, because I found, as you mentioned, there are a lot of scientific studies, prejudice against black people, against gay people, against Muslims, against disabled people, even against overweighted people. There are a lot of scientific studies, but I found almost nothing about one minority, and this is the minority of the rich people. And so I was very curious about how people think about the rich in different countries. And this was the reason I started with this research.
Okay. And this is the first study of its kind, right?
Yes, there are some scientific papers where there is a topic, but there's almost nothing, even not in the United States. What was a really surprise for me on the one hand, and on the other hand, it was a good opportunity for me to, for every scientist, it's good if you find something, a new topic. And I started with only 4 nations when I published my book in Germany. It was based on a poll in Germany, in the UK, in France and the United States. And now I see you have here the Swedish books. There are 7 countries, but now I completed it, and I can tell also a little bit about this. I had now the same poll in 4 Asian countries. So today I can speak about the attitude towards the rich in Europe, in the United States, and in Asia. And this is very interesting for me to compare it.
And why should we take an interest in attitudes towards the rich? Why is this important?
I think you see it in a lot of countries that economic development and economic progress, but on the other hand also negative economic development, very often start with positive or negative attitudes towards the rich. I will give you one example. In China, 40 years ago, 88% of the people there lived in extreme poverty, 88%. Today, it's less than 1%. It was I think the greatest economic miracle that happened in history in China. But it started with economic reforms by Deng Xiaoping with the slogan, let some people be rich first. Yes? So it started with a positive attitude towards rich people. And I think you had in Sweden in the 70s and in the 80s a negative economic development with a lot of problems. And it started with negative attitude towards rich people. I read about it, that even some people like the IKEA founder, Kamprad, left the country. And I think this was not good for Sweden. And so I think it's not only a question of fairness against this one group, but it's also important for the rest of the society, because don't forget, in most cases, rich people are entrepreneurs in most cases. And if you have a negative attitude toward rich people or a positive attitude, it has something to do whether you have a positive or negative attitude towards entrepreneurship.
Your study looks at 7 different countries, as you mentioned, and its population's attitudes towards rich people. The United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Sweden. Could you tell us something about the conclusions?
Yes. So we had a lot of questions, polls in every country, a lot of questions. But to make a long story short, in the end, we calculated something that we called the social envy coefficient. This is one number to compare different countries. So you can see this is one possibility to see whether people are more or less envious in a country. And I don't know whether it's possible to show it here, whether people see it. I have here the social envy coefficient for a lot of countries. You mentioned the 7 countries, but in the meantime, we had the same poll in 4 Asian countries. And so I can give you the result that people in France were the most envious people. We had the social envy coefficient 1.26. The higher the number is, the more envious are the people. And on the other hand is Japan with 0.25. You see, there's a big difference. So that means people in France are most envious, and in Japan, from these 11 countries, less envious. And then Sweden is only 0.44. What is good, it's similar to, for example, United States, UK, or Vietnam. So Sweden is not so high as it comes to social envy. For example, we in Germany, we have 0.97, so people in Germany are much more envious than you are here in Sweden.
You touched upon it earlier, but why do you think that Swedes are less envious than French people and German people?
Part of it has something to do with culture, but maybe it's experience. Maybe people in Sweden are a little bit like vaccinated against being too much envious. Of course, you have here, people who are envious against the rich, but it's lower as it is in France. And maybe it has something to do with the experience in Sweden in the 70s and 80s, that you saw what is the result if you have always higher and higher taxes against rich people. And it's not only about taxes, it's also about respect for wealthy people, that every other minority tells you that you should speak with respect about them. And people are very sensitive and even sometimes hypersensitive if it is about how you speak about other minorities. But about rich people, it's allowed to say in every talk show, and so you can see everyone. I don't know how it is here in Sweden, but in Germany it's this way to say all very bad and even aggressive things against rich people, and no one will say anything against it. For example, I come from Berlin. This is my hometown, and there we had demonstration and protesters, and they had these posters like "Kill your landlord," for example, or "Eat the rich." Or if you watch on the internet, you can buy these T-shirts with "Eat the rich" and with a guillotine. That what means rich people should be killed, as they did in French Revolution with a guillotine. And what's the reason why in some countries they are more and in other countries less envious? I think in Sweden maybe it's only an assumption from me. People made the experience that if you harm rich people, in the end, you harm the whole society and not only the rich. For example, if rich people flee your country and go to other countries, and maybe they pay then their wealth tax or income tax in other countries and not in Sweden. It's not so bad for these people. Rich people can judge when they don't like to live in Sweden or another country. They have their apartments everywhere in the world. They can live somewhere else. But I think it's not good for society if entrepreneurs in society, if they decide to go away. And maybe in Sweden, people had this experience that it's not the best idea. And so in the beginning of the 90s, a lot of things changed in Sweden, as you know better than I know. Of course, we have very high income taxes today in international comparison. But for example, you have no wealth tax and you have no inheritance tax. And if I give you a gift, I don't have to pay a tax for this, as you have in other countries. And I think these are very positive developments. And I think the positive development that you had in Sweden, economic development, this was a result from this from a change in the policy against rich people. And we had the same experience in Germany. In Germany, we had high taxes in the end of the 90s, 53%. And then we had a social democratic chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, but he made a more, liberal reform policy. And the taxes for rich people, they were decreased from 53% to only 42%. And together with other things like deregulation for the labor market and so, this reform ended in more welfare for everyone. The positive economic development in Germany started with these liberal reforms. And there are a lot of other examples in history. You know what happened in the 70s in the UK, when you had 83% taxes, and for some kinds of taxes even you had 98% at this time in the UK, and then it was an economic disaster what happened there in the 70s in Great Britain. And then we had Maggie Thatcher, and then the same story: privatization, liberalization of the labor market, and lowered the taxes for everyone, not only for rich people. I think for rich people it was from 83% to in the end something like 40%. Yes. And this was not only good for rich people, it was good for everyone. It was good for the society.
Would you say that Sweden, Germany, and perhaps the UK as well are starting to forget the lessons learned from the 70s and 80s?
In a way, yes, and in another way, no. Because I think it takes only some years that people forget why was it that they make this progress. Yes, you can see it in a lot of countries. It's like, I give you a comparison. Think of someone who gained fat, maybe like weighed 150 kilos, but not with muscle. I speak about fat, because he ate all the time his chocolate and his pizza and his pommes and all this stuff. And then he starts to make a diet, and he loses weight, and in the end he has maybe only 80 kilos instead of 150. And then 1 or 2 years later, he forgot why it was, and he starts, oh, why shouldn't I eat some chocolate and some pizza? I have a good body, and why not? Yes, but don't forget what was the reason why you lost the weight, because you stopped eating too much chocolates, you stopped eating all this pizza. So people forget it after a time. What were the reasons? And you can see it in a lot of countries, that sometimes after years, or sometimes it takes longer or shorter, that people forget. It's the same with socialism. Think about in the 80s. End of the 80s, when everywhere in Soviet Union, East Germany, and all the socialist countries, we saw what socialism meant, and that it was a disaster for the people. And a lot of people in the world understood at this time, in the beginning of the 90s, that capitalism is better than socialism. And now, what happens is 30 years later, and I can read a lot of books and a lot of articles where people praise socialist ideas. Of course, they tell you, no, we don't want this kind of Soviet communism. We have a new idea, a better, new form of socialism. But in the end, it's the same old ideas. I give you an example from my country. You know, I come from Germany. I live in Berlin, in the capital of Germany. And you know, we had the elections, and at the same time, we had at the same times people voted in Germany about the question, not in Germany, in Berlin, whether you should expropriate big real estate companies. And 56% of people in Berlin voted for expropriation of real estate companies. This is a socialist idea, and they tried it. They tried it in East Germany, because all this, what they want now, that the state should own the properties and not private investors, and all this, restrictions for rent increase and so. They tried it all in East Germany, socialist time, and it didn't work. Of course not. it was a disaster. When socialism ended in 1989, all these buildings were in so bad shape, and two-thirds of them had no oil and no gas. They had only, with coal and so on. So it didn't work in East Germany. But now, 30 years later, people forget, like the fat man who forgot why he gained so much weight. They forget it, and they try the same again. They want to try the same again. So it's the same. I gave this a comparison with a vaccine. You know how this vaccine. I got this vaccine 4 months ago, my shot against corona, and now I was at the doctor last Friday and told him to measure if I have enough antibodies, and you don't have enough antibodies. And so maybe it happens now in Sweden, where you have, I heard about it now, a lot of people in in the Social Democratic Party who want again introduce wealth tax and all these things. The same as with the fat man, forgot what was the reason for the economic disaster that you had in the 80s.
Yes, and you hear the same ideas from within the German Social Democratic Party as well, I believe.
Absolutely, yes. It's you have sometimes things are worldwide, international. Think about the 80s. In the 80s, the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, you had this Ronald Reagan in the United States, pro-market economy. I mentioned Margaret Thatcher. Then you had these economic reforms in Sweden, some years later in Germany. And now it's all the other way around. Now we had this time when it's the comeback of socialism. I read a book some weeks ago from a philosopher, and he recommended or he supported we should try against real communism. Even he spoke about communism. And okay, not everyone speaks about communism, but I think if you look at the Democratic Party in the United States, for example, some years ago you had Bill Clinton. And you had in the UK, you had Tony Blair, and I think Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, they were more pro-market. But today you have there people like Bernie Sanders, or in the UK you had Jeremy Corbyn, not now, but in the Social Democratic Party in Germany, someone like Gerhard Schröder. I told you he made all these reforms in the beginning of the 2000s. Now people hate him in the Social Democratic Party. They are in favor of much more, leftist policy, and I think it's an international development. What happened in the 80s and 90s, and what happens today. Even in China, you see the difference. They started with economic reforms in the beginning of the 80s with Deng Xiaoping, introduced more private property and pro-market. And I think today, development in China, it's again a little bit, come back from the state, and that there are more people who believe in state economy. So it's, I think, a worldwide development, and I try to do a little thing against this.
Yes. One concept that is very central in your book is the zero-sum thinking. Could you please explain that?
Yes, if you speak about zero-sum thinking, of course, this is very harmful, and I can describe and tell you what it is, but I will do it in German because it's from a German poet. It's from Bertolt Brecht, and it's very short. It goes this way. Armer Mann und reicher Mann standen da und sahen sich an, und der Arme sagte bleich, wär ich nicht arm, wärst du nicht reich. Maybe you can translate it for your audience.
A rich man and a poor man looked at each other, and the poor man said, if you weren't rich, I would be poor.
Yes, okay, exactly. That's it. But this is absolutely nonsense. This zero-sum thinking. I spoke about China some minutes ago, and I come back to China because it's a best example to show why it's absolutely crazy. This zero-sum thinking, that some people are only rich because other people are poor. These zero-sum thinkers, they believe that someone can only be rich because it takes away something from the poor. And then I asked them, how would you interpret what happened in China from 1980 till today? I mentioned this, 1981 in China, 88% lived in extreme poverty. Today it's less than 1%, from 88% to less than 1%, because they introduced private property and free market. At the same time, the number of millionaires and billionaires increased. Today, you have so many billionaires in China as in no other country in the world except United States, where some more. But even now, I read this some month ago, in Beijing, you have more billionaires than in New York, the first time in history. So, and how would you explain, if you believe in zero-sum thinking, how this could happen in China? At the same time, the number of poor people decreased and the number of rich people increased. This wouldn't be possible if zero-sum thinking is right, and it's wrong, because I tell you, these are only two sides of the same coin. Some people grow rich, and why? Most people become rich as entrepreneurs. And when they become entrepreneurs, and when they become rich only for one reason, because they have products that are useful for a lot of consumers. And then new working places are created, new products and so on. And this is not only good for the people who grow rich, but this is good also for the poor people. And so it's right, a lot of people believe in the zero-sum thinking, but it's absolutely nonsense.
One thing that struck me as especially interesting in your book is that younger people in the United States seem to have a lot more negative attitudes towards rich people than the older generations, whereas it's the exact opposite relationship in many of the European countries that you have researched. Why is that?
Yes, absolutely. This is correct. First of all, it's correct then that in America, United States, the older people, I mean, in my age, older than 60, I'm 64, are much more positive toward rich people than younger people. If we speak about younger people, we speak about people younger than 30 years old, between 18 and 30 or 16 and 30 people in our poll. And I think the older people in the United States are this way how we think about Americans in general. Critical against the state, pro-capitalist, positive toward rich people. This is how we think about Americans. But something changed. But I have to add something. It is correct that younger people in the United States are much more negative, or I should better say, are much less positive toward rich people than the older ones. But that doesn't mean that most of them are very negative towards the rich. They are more negative than the older ones, but if you compare it with other countries, this is not the case. On the other hand, if we speak about Europe, it's correct in most European countries, younger people are a little bit more positive than older people, but the difference is not so big as it is in the United States. There's only one country where we have really a big difference, and this is Italy. And in Italy, it's exactly the other way around than it is in the United States. Young people are very positive towards the rich, and the older one are negative. There are a lot of things why to explain it. I'm waiting for some more maybe explanations for people who are more familiar, for example, with developments in Italy than I am. But we had a very strong communist party in the 70s and in the 80s in Italy, one of the biggest parties in Italy. And I think the people who are older now, when they were younger and when their political views were formed, I think there was a very strong leftist movement in Italy, and even with the party today, you don't have any longer this big communist party. I don't know whether maybe they have one, but only a very small one. So there are some changes, but I want to add one thing that is very important, and maybe that I can tell for your audience what you can't find in the book. I will recommend the book to everyone, but after I finished the book, I didn't finish my research, and because this book will be published now next year in Vietnam and in China. Yes, and next month it will be published in Italy and in Spain, but then they will publish it in Asia as well. And so I had the same poll in Vietnam and in Japan and in China and in South Korea. And this was very interesting for me because the people especially in South Korea and in Vietnam and in Japan have a very positive attitude toward rich people. You see it here, I mentioned before, this social envy coefficient. And the lowest social envy coefficient in the world that we found was in Japan and then in South Korea. In China, by the way, it's even higher than it is in Sweden. So China is in this way a little bit more like the European countries, but especially in Vietnam. And then we had another question, and this question was very interesting result for me. We asked everyone, how important is it for you to become rich? Is it very important or slightly important or not at all important? And in most countries, European countries, in the United States, it was something like 30% of the people said that it's very important or important for them to become rich. Maybe not everyone told us the truth, but because I think there are so many people playing the lottery, and I think everyone who plays the lottery doesn't play it only to win maybe 10 euro or something like that, but maybe to have 1 million. But okay, the answer was in most countries like 30%. On average in Europe and United States, it was 28% of the people who said that they want to be rich. Then in the 4 Asian countries, on average it was 58%. It was 43% in Japan, it was 50% in China, it was 58% in South Korea, and it was 73% in Vietnam. Yes, that people said that they want to grow rich. What was interesting in Vietnam, even more women than men said that they want to grow rich. In all other countries, there were more men who said that they want to, more male than female, that they want to grow rich. But in Vietnam, this was the other way around. And I think, I have some good connections to Vietnam. It has something to do, people are very ambitious there. They are more hungry. We are in Europe, sometimes we are, not every one of us, of course, we have here hungry and industrious people, but we have also a lot of people who only call for the state and...
Like the fat man.
Like the fat man,
Who
yes.
once used to be slim. Dr. Zitelmann, it's been an honor having you as a guest.
So, thank you very much. I appreciate very much. And of course, I had a lot of time to explain my things, but you have much more information in this book, and I can recommend it to every one of you. And I think I will be back in Sweden soon.
We're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Och stort tack för att ni har tittat.